All right, today I'm going to be talking about a problem or practice that I've discovered in my classroom. And with only a couple of years of experience under my belt, I've right away noticed that heredity is an area of struggle for my students. With heredity, the eighth grade standards become a little bit more complex than they have been in the past. Um, just even looking at that picture right there, you can tell that the kids are expected to understand cellular level things such as meiosis, mitosis, as well as more on the larger scale, which would be heredity with Punnett squares and pedigrees. So here you can see that with the intricacies of these topics and the vocabulary, I have seen overall low performances in these areas of study and regarding our standards and the Ohio standardized testing, which would be called AIR assessments. So I'll be referring to our AIR assessments throughout this presentation. Um, this is not an area that I like to see kids struggle in just because they will be moving on to high school biology and they will automatically be using and recalling what they learned this year as their foundation. So, this is the problem that I decided to address, and I knew that something needed to change in the classroom to help make this topic a little bit more memorable. So, some of the data that I looked at, I combined student performances on AIR tests from 2021 and 2022 to gather this data. I essentially took 5 questions from the 2021 AIR test, and then I figured out which questions correlated to those 5 questions from the 2022 AIR test and combined their data together. And they just numbered those questions 18 through 23. In these 6 questions, you can kind of tell what percentage of students are scoring in the limited category, the basic, the proficient, the accomplished, and advanced. We at minimum want to see our students performing in the proficient level, but that is not the case. There's several questions such as 19 and 21 where we're seeing a significant number fall in that limited and basic category, and that is not what we want to see. So this was kind of some of the data that I used that identified this problem. And here is what I kind of came up with to get things rolling. So when I started studying this problem and looking for reasons why either I'm just facing this issue or if other educators are as well, I came across an article from a Michigan State professor who created a study where they were mapping out student understanding of the different biological processes. So they also found that some of this vocabulary is just hard for students to understand. And some of the words are similar, which does not make things easy, such as mitosis and meiosis. Their processes are similar, but create very different outcomes. Punnett squares can be tricky because we once again have similar words, genotype, phenotype, that mean completely different things, but they're both part of the same process. And then another article that I found that helped me to understand that this is not just a Port Clinton City Schools problem, but an everywhere problem was from a biology educator who explained that there's just a lot of misconceptions with genetics and genetics material and what Mendel, who's the father of genetics, has done. So when there's a lot of things that are misunderstood, this really needs to be slowed down and found ways to do things better because the numbers are never going to get better for students understanding until things change. So with that being said, I set out to research 3 different methods that could potentially help with this problem. So the first was the adoption of the Teach Genetics pathways. This pathway was pretty much already set up for you. The Teach Genetics had all the lessons, all the materials you would need. You simply would just follow that specific framework. Um, and it was really only a 3-day framework, which caused some issues, just because it's not being able to teach genetics in 3 days is not something that's happening in 8th grade. Another one that I found that would be a strategy for change was the science lattice method, where really they combined three things. So three things got lattice together, and those were hands-on, problem solving, and inquiry-based learning. So this really takes everything to the lab setting, and nothing is really taught in an informational setting. And then the last one was a sequencing through science pathways. This was a foundational program where you really started with the vocab, the most basic level, and things got more complex as you went. And ending with implications of how what you're learning can be tied to what's going on in society. So here you can see how these strategies kind of ranked for Port Clinton. This was just my personal opinion for how I felt this would work in my classroom. The first strategy obviously was that teach genetics curriculum, where you just simply adopted the curriculum. Super easy. And it probably would have a medium to high impact. It's hard to tell. Probably more on the medium end, though, because it's not going to work for everyone. It's going to be way too fast. Then the creating of your own lattice method curriculum, that's going to have a pretty high impact because the teacher still has control of the pacing, more student freedom, and it's not going to go so fast. And then the using of sequencing through science pathways, definitely going to have a high effect, but might not hit on all the details necessary. Okay, so implementation indicators. So there's a few things that need to happen in order for the method that I chose, which is the science lattice method curriculum. So I went after looking at that chart and I looked at how it would work. I chose to further explore the science lattice method curriculum. Teacher, students, and classroom and student work. There were things that I would like to see in order to know that this method to help the problem of practice is really working. So as a teacher, I'm going to be creating labs based off students' needs. Students are going to be completing the lab, making observations, and showing what they know through the lab handouts that they complete while doing labs. In the classroom, the only thing that I saw being different would be the structuring, as then every kid is not going to be doing the same thing. Every student is going to be doing a lab that pertains to them and their needs and their understanding levels. And then as far as student work, the change that I see that needs to be happening here is that our homework needs to align with what's happening in the lab, not just what happens in general throughout the week. So after I went through all the indicators that I wanted to be seeing, I created this action plan timeline for the science lattice method, where I started by looking at my objective and my strategy for this, and then how I would be assessing students. This process is going to go from about the middle of October, from the second week of October until about the second to third week of February. To start this process, you do need some prior data to be able to base your decisions off of. So I went ahead and built in time at the beginning for taking the AIR benchmark. So you can take 2 benchmarks for the state test to understand where the students are and understanding those standards that we are looking at that address heredity. Once that pre-assessment is done, you're able to kind of compare data to the data we had from the end of year state tests from 2021 and 2022. Throughout the process of these labs, there are also going to be some quizzes sprinkled in there, but generally they'll be completing longer labs that take several days. And the key to that, and something that I've never tried before, is that will allow time for the kids to ask questions and dig further into the information and base it based off what they want to know and want to learn rather than what I think they should learn. The final project I thought was pretty cool that I came up with. They'll be doing cumulative project based on all the labs that they complete because it's going to be super lab heavy, which has not happened in the past. And then, in order to continue the conversation of data around whether or not what I'm doing is working or not, there will be a post assessment, and that will take the form of the AIR benchmark too. There are certain indicators that I would like to meet with that I'll be talking about in a moment. But with that post assessment, essentially, you're going to do the same thing as you did with the pre assessment. You're going to figure out which questions on that assessment closely align to questions 18 through 23 that we used for our original data to identify the problem. And we want to see growth from benchmark 1 to benchmark 2 for sure. But not only do we want to see growth from benchmark 1 to benchmark 2, we want to see growth from the initial data, so the 2 previous air tests to the second benchmark. So that's roughly what I just talked about here. The goal specifically would be to see scores improve by a minimum of 20% from their previous scores and 10% from the data previously displayed in the first 2 figures. If we aren't seeing that, then it's a little concerning because that means that not only did it not grow from where their knowledge was before the chapter started, but now they are not any further ahead than students in the past have been. Once we've discovered if this is effective or not, then I would definitely like to carry this method of teaching forward and apply that to all my units of study, whether it be addressing earth science or physics. But if it works, then it's definitely something that can be translated into all areas of science, not just heredity. I just want to test it with heredity first because that is where we have identified the largest problem of practice at Port Clinton Middle School in 8th grade.